Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Parish in Concord on this beautiful spring day. I'm Reverend Howard Dana, and I want to welcome you to church this morning. We're so glad that you've taken an hour on this Sunday morning to be with us and to be together. It really does feel like we gather as a congregation every Sunday, just as we would were we in our own building. And the most amazing thing about it is, though, there are more people that join us from further away than ever could on a Sunday morning in person. I want to welcome folks who are joining us from across the United States and even in other countries around the world. So welcome to church this morning. This is where you're supposed to be for the next hour, and we are glad that you have joined us. If you would benefit from there being closed captioning on this service, you can find the button to enable that down at the bottom of your device. It should just be a little box with a CC in it. So mess around with that, see if you can get those turned on if that's something that you would like, and that would help you. We are in the middle of a three-part series on First Parish in the 20th century. Last week, we talked about the fire in 1900. Today, we're looking at the Unitarian Universalist Association and its formation in 1961. And then next week, we will look at the About Your Sexuality controversy that came to Concord in the 90s. So glad you're here for this. That's where we're headed. Our call to worship this morning are words from John Buren's book, Universalists and Unitarians in America. And he is quoting, let's see, Donald Harrington. Donald Harrington was the speaker, the preacher at the service where the Unitarians and the Universalists joined on May 15th, 1961. So that the 60th anniversary of that was just yesterday. Listen to what Don Harrington had to say to the gathered General Assembly as the Unitarians and the Universalists merged. We have achieved a union which is the result of more than 100 years of striving, and which now, at last, when the time is fully ripe, has come to completion. It is our tremendous potential, born of the world's response to our new relevance, caused by this world's need for a religion which is dynamic instead of static, unitive instead of divisive, universalistic instead of particularistic, history-making rather than history-bound, that has made this Unitarian Universalist merger necessary and inevitable. And I'm realizing I forgot to introduce everybody else who is here. That's the nature of worship. It doesn't always go in the order you think it should. So we'll go back into gallery view, and Beth Norton is here. Why don't you say hi, Beth?
Good morning, all. It's great to be with you this morning.
Dawn Van Patten's here.
Good morning, everyone.
And Amy Friedman, Reverend Amy Friedman.
Good morning, Howard. Today we explored being perfectly imperfect in our family service, so you're right on time.
I'm good at being perfectly imperfect. Jade Sylvan's here.
Hello, I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm so happy that it really feels like spring.
Adrian Betancourt is here.
So happy to be part of First Parish in Concord during these interesting times.
And our wonderful tech person who just gave me a wry smile when I charged right into the call to worship, Sarah Ritchie.
Good morning. It's good to be with you today.
Beth is going to have us light our chalices.
A ritual we share as Unitarian Universalists all over the country and is to light the chalice whenever we are creating a special space together, whether it be for worship or whether it be for an important conversation. And so I invite you to find a chalice or a candle and light it at this time to create that space in your own homes. And let's say together our chalice response. O flame of our faith, open our hearts and fill our bodies and souls with persistent strength. Enliven our spirits and engage us deeply in this life of ours, this sacred, essential moment now. Unitarian minister and youth director Samuel Anthony Wright wrote the text of We Would Be One for the Unitarian and Universalist Youth Continental Convention of 1953 and 1954. At this conference, the two groups merged to form the Liberal Religious Youth of the US and Canada. They were showing the way to the Unitarian Universalist denominational merger in 1961. So let's open our service by singing together today this beautiful hymn to the tune of Finlandia, We Would Be One.
Today, I want to talk to you about being brave. Have you ever seen a suit of armor that a knight or a warrior wears? I've had several occasions to be in a museum where they had a grand exhibit set up of these full suits of armor, and even with no one inside them, it can be a little intimidating. They're often set up holding weapons or up on a model horse who's also wearing armor to protect them, but also to strike fear into the heart of the opponent with exaggerated features. So I'd like to take a moment this morning for us to imagine that we are brave and bold warriors. Would you join me in putting on some armor? So first, we're gonna fasten on our feet some armor. So put something on your feet, something that would protect them. Probably make a grand clanking noise with each step that you take. Next, right onto your legs, fasten on shiny metal protectors on the bottoms of your legs and on your thighs. If you've never seen armor, think of the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. That's another good way to think of it. Next, we're gonna have to put on a shirt that's made entirely of chain metal. So it's really heavy. From wherever you pick it up, imagine how heavy it is. We put it on and put over our heads, and we put the chain metal on our arms, very heavy. on our other arm. And next, we need a very fancy plate that goes over our chest. It's going to protect our heart and our organs. So imagine as you put it on that it's protecting all of those soft places, but also that it is dazzling. It is engraved with the most amazing design you can imagine. Right over there. Next, we need a helmet. So get your helmet, also very heavy, and place it up over your head. And next, the face covering that comes down. Yes. Now, friends, into the breach. Do you know the best thing about pretend armor? You can just shake it off. I want to acknowledge that even without a full set of armor, you are brave. During the past year and a half, you have had to rapidly adapt to changing routines. You've had to navigate the world with new dangers and obstacles. You've learned new technologies, new ways of interacting with people. And in some ways, it was easier when everyone just retreated into their homes. Now schools and businesses are reopening, and some people are getting vaccinated. I hope that you will be vaccinated when you become eligible. Even though shots can be scary, vaccines are a proven way to protect us. And I am so happy that now everyone who is 12 and older is just become eligible. I was with the youth group last night at a meetup, and a whole bunch of them just got their first shots. And we promise to be mindful of those of you who are 12 and younger who are not eligible yet. And maybe some of us who are immunocompromised or who may never be able to be vaccinated. We care about your well-being too. These times require us to be brave as we become more social. We will need to listen carefully to each other and to be mindful of our own needs. And this is hard, emotional work, being brave. So I want to remind us of 3 ways that we can access reserves of courage that are much easier than putting on a full suit of armor. 1, taking deep breaths. 2, sharing our feelings. 3, asking for help. It takes bravery to keep growing, to keep learning, to keep loving. And I am so glad to be on this journey with all of you. Let's join in singing along with Beth.
Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to seek what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. And may we walk in peace.
Today's reading consists of words by Dana McLean Greeley from The Meeting House on the Green, A History of the First Parish in Concord and its Church. In 1957, there was a great enthusiasm for Arthur Gellis's new ministry in Concord. He was a very strong preacher and careful in the performance of his pastoral duties. He was a vigorous proponent denominationally of the merger in 1961 of the Continental Unitarian and Universalist bodies. His ministry was a social action-oriented ministry, and many people responded to his anti-Vietnam War sermons. He was also an outspoken critic of our government's policies. But many people also thought of him as an extremist. As the church had suffered division several times in the past, it suffered divisions again because of Gellis's pulpit positions or because of personal distrust or antagonisms. In 1970, Arthur Gellis went to serve another church.
Thank you, Jade, for that little bit about Arthur Gellis. So just yesterday, literally yesterday, was the 60th anniversary of the forming of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And what I want to focus on here for a few minutes is that merger and also what was going on in Concord, at First Parish in Concord at the time, because it's a fascinating story. So we heard that in 1954, the two youth groups from the Unitarians and the Universalists had gotten together and formed the Liberal Religious Youth. That was really the start of what later became the consolidation of two denominations. They had flirted with it a little bit as much as 100 years earlier, but in 1861, when they first started talking about it, they decided that the Unitarians and the Universalists were too dissimilar to join at that point. 100 years later, though, it was decided that there were a number of things that made perfect sense for us to come together as two denominations. And in some ways, it was also a marriage of necessity. By that time, the Universalists had dwindled some. Their brand of Christianity, which proclaimed that all would be saved, had been taken up by the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Baptists and other folks by and large. And so it wasn't as radical as it was when they got their start around the time of the Revolutionary War. The Unitarians were a little bit bigger, and they were really embarked on this voyage into science. Humanism had come alive in the 20th century. Scientific inquiry was very important to the Unitarians. But each body had congregational polity, which means that each of the churches could decide for themselves, essentially what they wanted to do, what kind of theology they wanted, what they wanted to do with their building, what minister they wanted to call, and those sorts of things. So the reason that they came together in 1961 was that the Universalists were really interested in continuing on, and particularly in continuing on with their name. They were worried that the word Universalist would die out if they did not join the right other folks. And the Unitarians were more than happy to have Universalist be part of the name. So in May of 1961, after 2 years of lots of talking, lots of meeting, lots of votes, lots of putting documents together and figuring this thing out, they finally voted to become one denomination. And that's when the Unitarian Universalist Association was born. It was made a little bit simpler because both of the previous denominations had been headquartered in Boston, so nobody had to move across the country. And they decided to just move in with the Unitarians at 25 Beacon Street in Boston. And 60 years later, they're still together. So what was going on in Concord at this time? That's a fascinating thing. Concord, I think it actually, the merger, from what I can find in Concord, was not a big deal at all. In fact, it's very hard to find any documentation at all about it. There are a few scant notes in some standing committee minutes. There's a mention in the annual report, but if it was a big deal in Concord, nobody wrote it down. And I think that one of the reasons that it probably was less of a big deal in Concord was that there was not a name change involved. Many of the Unitarian churches and some of the Universalist churches really objected early on to having their name changed. They wanted to be first Unitarian of thus and such, or first Universalist of thus and such. And putting the two words together was, for many of them, an awkward step to take. The other thing that was happening in Concord was that the Universalist church that was in Concord had folded almost, actually over a century before. So picture, if you will, the Catholic Church across from First Parish. It's right there, across from the flagpole and that circle that we all go around and around. That was originally built as the Universalist Church. That exact building was the Universalist Church in Concord, and it was founded in 1838. But it did not last very long, and the congregation had folded by 1857. The building was sold to a succession of denominations. The Methodists had it for a while, then the Catholics bought it. But that exact building where Holy Family meets every Sunday is our old Universalist building. But because the congregation had folded in 1857, there wasn't really any vestige of Universalism left in Concord. And so you didn't have to put together two churches in the town of Concord, as you did in some other places. These were also turbulent times in the United States and in the world. It's good to remember that Arthur Gellius was only in his 4th year as the minister at First Parish in Concord. And Sarah, will you put up a picture of Arthur Gellius for a moment so we can all see what he looked like? There he is, standing out in front of the church. He had come to Concord, and he was admired by many, many people, most especially admired for his social action stance and his fiery sermons that would get people all ready to take some action, which is just great. And as we'll hear in a minute, it was his stance on the Vietnam War that both attracted people to First Parish in Concord and also divided the church to some degree. So at the time of the merger, he was here in Concord, and he was a good proponent of the merger. The other person we're talking about today is Dana McLean Greeley, and Sarah, you can put up his picture next. Dana Greeley had left the Arlington Street Church in Boston. He had left in, let me see, so I don't get my dates wrong. He had left, I forget exactly when, he'd left to be the last president of the American Unitarian Association. And then when the merger happened in 1961, he ran for the presidency and was elected the first president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And he served there until 1969. He served 2 full terms as UUA president. Thank you, Sarah, for putting those up. So as things are unfolding in Concord, things are also unfolding in Boston that would affect First Parish in Boston, because no one knew, even Greeley himself, that he, after he was done being president of the UUA, would come and serve as the minister in Concord until his death in 1986. But the thing that I want to focus on is the times that this new denomination came into. It was founded in 1961, and very soon we are both into the civil rights movement and particularly into the Vietnam War. So in 1965, there are 3,500 ground troops who are sent to Vietnam. And by 1968, that number has grown to 536,000 people, just over 500,000 troops, and that's its peak in Vietnam. And so at the same time that Arthur Gellius is preaching against this war in Concord, Dana Greeley is finishing up his presidency at the UUA. And it's not that Greeley wasn't against the Vietnam War. In fact, the UUA and the General Assembly took some pretty strong stands. They just were not as much of a he was not as much of a firebrand as Gellius was. And so these two things are going on. And finally, ultimately, sadly, in 1970, Arthur Gellius resigns the pulpit in Concord. And then Dana Greeley is called to it without any interim in between them. So that must have been quite a shift for the church. The church was much smaller in those days. In fact, I've heard stories of it being 70 people, 80 people on a Sunday morning. But to go from Arthur Gellis to Dana Greeley must have been a very interesting shift, because then we know also that Dana Greeley did a lot of work to build the church up and to make it bigger. So in 1970, Dana Greeley starts his ministry in Concord. And in 1973, the last US troops leave Vietnam. A long story about how we got to where we are right now, but an interesting one. Because I think that one of the most interesting things for me about First Parish in Concord today is that I don't feel any ambivalence about the merger. I don't feel any ambivalence about using both the two names, Unitarian and Universalist. I don't know if there was a struggle over this in the past, but right now it feels like we are UUs. It feels like we belong to a church that was founded almost 400 years ago and that has gone through many, many changes itself, as have we as Unitarians and Universalists, and now Unitarian Universalists. And I think that it's interesting because folks who come to our congregation tend to have a number of identities. We identify with both the church and the wider denomination. And I think that this actually opens the door for us to be even more involved on the denominational level. There were only 152,000 people in the new UUA in 1961, and there are not that many thousand more today. So ours is a very, very small denomination, but it's also a mighty denomination. It is brave in exactly that way that Amy talked about being brave. It is brave because it speaks out on a whole variety of issues. It is brave because it was one of the first denominations to have marriage equality. It is brave because it has stood up for a woman's right to choose. It is brave because it has done things at every point in its life to stand up for other folks and to speak truth to power. And so the question that I want to ask you today, I don't want you necessarily to think about First Parish. We know why we're at First Parish, but why are you a Unitarian Universalist? Why do you belong to this bigger thing, this grander thing, this thing that got formed in 1961? Why are you a Unitarian Universalist? The question will come up on the screen here in a moment. What makes you a Unitarian Universalist? Please share briefly in the chat as Beth plays some music, and then I'll read a few of those. So let me read a few of these that are in the chat. There's really good stuff in here. So what makes you a Unitarian Universalist? I am a humanist. Openness and lack of dogma. More than 10 generations a Universalist because it provides some truth about existence. Church should ask the questions, not tell you the answers. Community and social action. because it's good to have fellow travelers, aligned values, and on the side of love. We don't argue that our way is the only way. Big tent, lack of dogma, social activism, honor all beings. Inclusion, I'm just jumping down here because there's lots and lots of them here. Appreciate evolution of religious beliefs, community, social activism, spiritual belonging. There's some that are too long to read. The commitment to an individual's search for spirituality. Go ahead and take a look at these when you get a chance. We believe in justice for all. There's really great stuff here in the chat. Thank you all. We're now going to hear a song that harkens back to our Universalist heritage. For the Universalists, love was the most important thing. In fact, on altar tables and in churches and over doorways was often written in Universalist churches, God is love. And they really, really believed that. And I think one of the best things that we retain from our Universalist heritage is that idea that love is powerful, powerful, even more powerful than death. So let us hear this beautiful song about love.
Every week we come together to worship with one another, and we also come together to share in each other's joys and concerns. This week, collectively, we hold in our hearts Liz, Diane, and Betty. You can read more about them in the chat. And now I open the space for you to name a person aloud or type them into the chat, anyone who you're holding in your heart. It doesn't have to be something that's negative. It can be a celebration as well. But whoever is on your heart today, it can even be yourself, please, you can call it aloud or type it into the chat. Will you pray with me? Dear God, we are so tired. We have lost so much over the past 14 months, including routine after routine. The changes have just kept coming, and we have had almost no control over them. We have had no time to rest. We are deeply unsettled. These continue to be wild and unsettling times. It feels like as soon as we orient ourselves to new circumstances, they change again, and we need to reassess what risks mean. It's exhausting, God. We know from history, human times have always been wild and unsettling, but this, we know that nothing has stayed the same for long, but this, we know that nothing has ever been 100% safe, but this. We are yearning to be settled. But let us remember that when those with privilege settle, it is often at the expense of others with less. Let this time of deep unsettlement remind us of our responsibility to one another. As things move toward what some might consider to be normal, as we move forward, let us remember that we all breathe each other's air, that we all live on each other's world. Let us not grasp so tightly to the myth of certainty that we are unable to move with the changing winds. And please, God, let us rest. Amen.
We live in yet another highly charged, divided time in US history. And again, tension spills over into our own UU faith community. Have you been hearing prominent Republicans use the term woke in highly derisive and sarcastic ways? African Americans and Black Lives Matter coined the term woke to mean keeping alert and awake to justice concerns, such as police brutality. For white allies, this means an honest and good faith effort to grapple with the legacies of racism. But some reactionaries now regularly use woke as an insult against anyone who is concerned about justice and racism. They claim that wokeness makes whites oppressed, victims, and under attack. First Parish can use some more delegates from our church to the upcoming National UU General Assembly. It's fully online, no cost to you as a delegate. Going outside of our First Parish bubble and into the greater UU world, and then bringing the information and tenor and tone back to us is a very important job that we need more people like you to do. Our church is demonstrating a commitment to addressing white supremacy culture. At GA, you can discover how other UU congregations are building a more inclusive faith. You can also help us understand some of the UU white backlash. At this GA, for instance, 2 candidates in an election are vying for a seat on the UUA Board of Trustees. One of them published a book titled Used to Be UU. It loudly complains against our UUA's so-called extremist and anti-racist initiatives and denies the existence of white supremacy culture. He is part of a vocal, unhappy faction of our UU world who disrupt GA, spread discontent, hold meetings and conferences, and call upon us to go backwards and return to our UU heritage. But this can serve as an opportunity for us to figure out responses to UUs who might be confused and uneasy about our new way forward. And so please step up to join our GA delegation at this historic juncture in our UU faith.
Thank you, Adrian. If you're interested in being a delegate for GA, just get a hold of me or Adrian and we can point you in the right direction. The standing committee is keeping the list, so we'll help you figure it out. We come to the time in our service in which we are generous. We are a generous congregation to begin with, and each week you are given an opportunity to be even more generous. Each week we share our offering plate with a worthy organization, and in the month of May, we are sharing it with Concord Prison Outreach. Concord Prison Outreach has been a long time program that the members of the congregation have supported. So in a moment, a number will appear on your screen. You can just text a whole number to that number, a 20, a 50, a 100. You can also mail a check into the church office or pledge or give online as you would like. Let us now take up an offering for the good work and witness of First Parish in Concord and Concord Prison Outreach.
now is the time for invitations. So our church newsletter should be showing up in your email every Friday. So if you've subscribed, but you don't see it, do check in your spam folder. And that newsletter is full of church and UU activities and events. You can find more news and events on our Facebook pages. So we've got the main church Facebook page, the RE Facebook page, and the Social Action Community Facebook page among them. I'm very happy to speak to any of you about your social action interests and connect you to activities. Please note that our church's annual meeting is right after the service on June 20th. So it was changed to the 20th. And all church groups need to submit their annual reports to Sarah Burns by the beginning of June. So that deadline is June 2nd. And now let's hear from our standing committee member, Liz Rust, about coffee hour.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm Liz Rust from the Standing Committee, and I'll be glad to join you at coffee hour today. And we can enjoy a few moments together before going out and enjoying this beautiful day. So thank you and see you there.
Okay, so as an introduction to our next song, Unitarian minister and poet Marion Franklin Ham wrote the words to As Tranquil Streams in 1933, a full 28 years before the merging of Unitarian and Universalists into the UUA. The fact that it was written and sung with the intent of celebrating the merger a generation before it happened is a testament to the time and effort required to accomplish the joining of these two religious traditions. So please join in singing our closing hymn, As Tranquil Streams.
We Unitarian Universalists are a small but mighty group. We are like the leaven that you put into bread. It's just a tiny amount, but it makes its way through all of the flour and all of the water and helps the loaf to rise and be what it is. Let us be the leaven in this loaf of ours, this great democracy that we live in, this imperfect country which strives always to be better and to never leave anyone behind. Please join in our benediction, saying, "Go out into the world in peace, have courage, Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.